All right, folks, here we go with the notes for Chapter 13, talking about negotiating and closing. Now, as we get into this chapter, we're going to kind of take a look at this on a little bit of a different approach. The way that this chapter is written, there's a lot of different concepts that are in there. We're not going to be able to really cover them all, at least in the scope of the lecture notes. So we're going to try between the lecture and study questions and discussion to highlight on a couple of the different concepts that are in there. We're going to try to use the 53 rules that the author uses as the basis for our discussion and highlight some of the most important things in the chapter. So with that in mind, here we go. First off, when it comes to negotiating, you must assume that your prospects, customers, and buyers possess varying degrees of negotiating knowledge and expertise. For the most part, this is not going to be their first rodeo. They've been involved in negotiations, maybe not with advertising, especially when it comes to new advertisers, but they're going to have done negotiations when it comes to dealing with vendors, dealing with their own customers. So they're going to be a bit savvy when it comes to bringing to the table some of the things that they expect and things that they're going to be willing to give up on when it comes to certain expectations and, doing a little give and take. They expect you to do the same thing. So with that in mind, you want to be as prepared as you possibly can when you get to this stage in the sales process. Negotiating in the media is different, though, from most other types of negotiating, and it requires special skills for two different reasons. First, media negotiating is not about winning at all costs in hard-nosed competitive battles over things like price and terms and conditions. The media do the vast majority of their business with long-term customers and agency buyers, and maintaining relationships with these customers and buyers is going to be absolutely vital. We're trying to set up something here where people are going to be willing to be repeat clients. So you want to make sure that you're negotiating in such a way that you're doing it in good faith, both for your company and for their behalf, thinking a little more in terms on their behalf. And you want to do it in such a way that both sides come out with a favorable outcome. Both sides win after the negotiation is over. And it creates this environment where they're going to want to do business with you again. Secondly, media sales have perishable inventory behind them. In other words, if you don't sell the inventory, it goes to waste. It becomes worthless because everything is time specific. If you have certain slots available on a Friday afternoon, Friday comes and goes, you haven't sold that inventory, then you can never go back and sell that again because that time is gone. So again, the ultimate goal of negotiating is to reach a satisfactory agreement in order to close a deal. Satisfactory on both your side and theirs. Again, the goal being that both sides win. So let's take a look at the various rules in the negotiating and the closing process. Rule number 1. Do not negotiate until you've created value and created a differential competitive advantage for your product in the mind of a prospect, customer, or a buyer. So you want to try to avoid bringing up cost very early in the negotiation. An example question response is here on the screen. It's not as simple as just putting a sticker price on an advertising package because every package in an ideal world is going to be customized in such a way that it meets the specific needs of the client. So that doesn't mean that there's a overall basic happy meal, if you will, but that the meal that's being sold is going to be customized to their needs with their sandwich and the sandwich the way they like it and the side they want given to the correct specifications. Maybe think of it more like a Starbucks order than you would something that you just kind of pick up and go. Okay, that might be a good way to think about it. Rule number 2, do not discuss price, again, until you're ready to negotiate and close. So you want to keep in mind that you want your client to see what all they are getting for the investment they're going to make. So you talk about all of the pros, you talk about all the things that they can expect out of this agreement. And that's going to build up a certain amount of value. Then the price that is discussed should seem like a value for all the things that they are getting. Rule number 3, match the other side's style. We're talking about temperament and attitude and body language and some of the subtext, the things that aren't necessarily said and all that sort of thing. So you want to try to match them as best as you can. Different types of negotiators that you may come across would be the competitors, the ones that are trying to take advantage of you in some way. I win, you lose. Okay. You have the accommodators that very much want to try to make you feel like you are the major winner here. They want to somehow please you to excess. There's the narcissists, when both I lose and you lose. In other words, no deal is manifested. Narcissists do not care about any outcome that does not give them what they want, and they typically want the whole pie. So narcissists very much make things about them to the point that it's not just in a competitor sort of way. It's an all or nothing, my way or highway sort of approach. And then there's the cooperators, where they're really coming to the negotiating table in good faith with that I win and you win attitude. You can see more details about these in your textbook, and I would encourage you to take a look at that. Rule number 4, when selling a perishable product, always set a deadline on your offers. This helps to create value to your product and to counter any delay tactics. So you want to try, especially when you're talking about price and creating value and all that sort of thing, if you put some sort of an expiration date on it that says that in order for them to take advantage of what it is you have to offer, they need to act with some sort of timeliness. And the more that they wait, the more that they hesitate on that and they let that time period expire, it is to your advantage then to say, well, because of the immediacy of things that are happening, perhaps the cost is going to increase, or perhaps we might have to reduce what we originally offered to you for the price that we had negotiated on, simply because that puts you in a situation as a salesperson that you either have to find somebody else that might take up the offer, or at the very least, just kind of putting that sense that now this is going to become a rush job in order to get things done the way that we had talked about them. Rule 5, make a commitment to your objectives and targets. Write them down and tell someone about them. Some different targets that you may want to achieve might be a specific opportunity. In other words, you're creating this certain package with these different features, different benefits, that sort of thing. There's price, creating value in terms of the monetary investment. There's the size of the order. Do you want them to have a full-blown advertising package? Do you want them to increase the number of commercials that they run, or the frequency? Or perhaps put more commercials if you're dealing with TV or radio in morning drive or afternoon drive, something like that. And also a good target would be share of budget. And what we're talking about here is the amount that they have for their advertising budget on the client side. Are you looking for them to spend maybe 20% of their whole advertising budget, or 50% of their whole advertising budget with you? And that's if you know in advance how much they plan to spend, usually on an annual basis, what they would look to spend on advertising. How much of that pie might you be able to get from them? Rule 6, always go into negotiations with a BATNA, if at all possible. BATNA stands for the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So what does that mean? Basically, what you're trying to do here is you're trying to have at least one viable alternative when you enter into a negotiation. And this is really what you're considering the best case scenario. You might have some other options there, but you're trying to push them to go to this best case one, which may be getting the most percentage of their budget, or having them increase the order of the number of spots, or the flight length, or something like that. Rule 7. Use tit for tat to teach the other side to cooperate. This means that you reciprocate the tactics, behavior, and style of the other side by matching them with your tactics, behavior, and style. It's kind of a reverse of the original golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So if you are receiving a certain type of mentality, certain type of language, that sort of thing, match them with that, whether it be positive or maybe even seen as a little off-putting. You don't want to take someone and disregard them or disrespect them, but at the same time, if they're negotiating in such a way that it seems like they're trying to get away with a little more of an advantage that you think is fair, then perhaps you can try to counteract with putting together an understanding for them that that's happening, and that you can respond in kind. Again, you don't want to completely discredit them or anger them, but you do want to let them know that you're trying to negotiate in good faith, and you can use this tactic to kind of remind them of that sort of thing. Rule number 8, never threaten, politely warn instead. What's the difference? A warning is a relatively polite statement about what might happen. If you go and do this sort of thing, I may have to respond in this particular way. A threat is more of a promise, to say not might, but you will. If you do this thing, I will have to do this other thing. Now, warnings and threats are effective only if they are credible. In other words, if you mean what it is that you're saying. The other side has to share your assumption that carrying out the warning or threat will make them worse off, and believe that you are not bluffing when you make a warning or a threat. In other words, whatever you say that could happen or will happen, you kind of have to commit that that thing could or will happen. Rule number 9. If you bluff, use a mixed strategy and occasionally bluff on a random basis. A bluff is when you act as though you have a strong position when, in fact, your position really is not that strong at all. So, it's kind of like when you're playing poker and you've got a low 2 pair instead of a full house, but you act like you've got the best hand around the table. In order to pull off a bluff, however, you have to understand the subtleties and proper timing in order to win a bluff. In other words, you can't show your tell. So this is something that, I wouldn't suggest as a novice salesperson that they go and do. You have to be able to have a good poker face. You have to be able to act pretty well. Now, if you're dealing with a buyer with whom you regularly negotiate, the one way that this really is not going to work is if you've caved in the past or kind of showed your tell to them in the past. Really, the ideal way here is if you've had an instance where you have walked away from a deal because things just didn't seem to be fair or didn't work out for one reason or another. If you've walked away in the past, then your current bluff does become more credible in that they know that you will get up and walk if some sort of condition is not met or you feel things are being done unfairly. If you've done that, then that's kind of evidence, past circumstances for what could be current results. So that is something to keep in mind. Rule number 10, most settlements are close to the midpoint, not necessarily pegging on one side or the other in terms of favorability. So a ballpark is that difference between a buyer's initial offer and your HLE. HLE stands for highest legitimate expectations. Your HLE needs to include not only the price, but also the terms and conditions. So you start off with that, and actually maybe even above that. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But you have this sense of ideally where you want to be in terms of an agreement, and then there's going to be some tolerance on one side or the other of where you actually wind up. But understanding that the other side is also going to have certain expectations, and if there's ways that you can work with each other to come to a mutual point where both of you are satisfied, well, that's a successful negotiation. Rule 11, always go into every negotiation with a commitment to your walkaways. So we kind of hit on this a little bit already, but it is important to know what your deal breakers are and estimate what the other side's deal breakers might be, and then you plan accordingly. In other words, you don't want to automatically go to your lowest that you're willing to go early in the negotiations, because you want to have some room to be able to play around. And if you go to your lowest and then they want even more, then you have no wiggle room, and you have to break your deal. And there might even be some things that are just absolutely non-negotiable. Hopefully there's not many of those things, but know what those are and be prepared to defend those things. If it is something that's below a certain range, for example, start significantly higher than that so that you have your ability to work your way down. During negotiations, you must focus on your HLE and not on your walkaway. Again, try to start with that high point, with that what it is that you're really looking for, so that you don't have to automatically resort to this has to be done this way or there's no deal. There's not much negotiation that goes on in a situation like that. Rule 13, always have a well thought out anchor. What do we mean by anchor? Your anchor is your opening offer. This is where you start the negotiation process. So you want to create an offer that you believe would be fairly reasonable to a prospect, but also puts you at a pretty good advantage. So again, you have some wiggle room if they come back with an objection. Now, it's, again, that sense that you want to start high and have room to come down so that negotiations can happen. That's important. Rule 14, never split the difference when it is in the other side's favor or it's not close to your highest level expectation. Have patience and continue to negotiate. So, don't come with offer A and then they come with offer B and then just automatically split the difference on that. You want to make things a little more gradual, just in case they are willing to meet you at some point that's not really at the halfway point, and that you don't have to go further than the halfway point if you don't have to. Rule 15, when faced with unacceptable and unethical bargaining tactics, name them, call them out. Tell the other side the names of those tactics. Let them know that you know what they're up to. Do not be fooled. And again, in the textbook, a lot of bargaining tactics related to this aspect. You can read through those and get yourself familiarized with them. Rule 16, never respond emotionally. Respond calmly, politely, and firmly. This is where you want your rider to come out. Don't show your elephant. You want to make sure that you're rational, that you're thinking straight, you're thinking logistically. Be matter of fact. Again, respectful, but matter of fact when you're in the course of a negotiation. Rule 17, the other side only has the power that you give them. Each side wants to gain a perceived power advantage so as to be perceived as dominant, and often maneuvers in such a way that they can make that happen, or at least try to make that happen. You want to make the other side submissive so that they don't make you submissive. Now, again, this is not about dominating in order to take advantage, but it is about the idea of negotiating in good faith. Do not give them more power than they rightfully have. Rule 18, check your ego at the door and do not let your fear or emotions get the better of you. Be patient. Sometimes these conversations go on and on and on. And as long as a conversation's going, there's always going to be a certain amount of hope. It'll help you maintain your confidence to be patient, to not let your ego get in the way. Also, keep your expectations high. If you realize that the other side's maneuvering for dominance and trying to appear to have a power advantage, really, that's them doing a bluff. Don't let that intimidate you. Here's the thing. Companies must advertise, and agencies must invest their clients' money in advertising. And the media provide advertisers access to audience, i.e. their customers. Therefore, as media salespeople, never, never, ever forget who has the power. You do. You have the power. And you can use that knowledge to boost your confidence in the face of any threats and bluffs that the other side may give you. Rule 19. Whoever controls the negotiating agenda controls the outcome. Discuss the agenda and do not start negotiating until you have reached consensus on a fair, balanced agenda. So again, you want to avoid discussing price as the first agenda item. Try to put forth your order of talking about the value of the advertising, what all that the client could potentially receive, what the benefits of it's going to be, what the expected results are going to be. Try to make price one of the last things, if not the last thing, that is talked about. Rule number 20. In order to avoid negotiating on each element individually, package all the elements in a deal so that the prices of the individual elements always add up to more than the packaged price. Think about it that in terms of, when you go and you buy multiple items. Again, let's go to the fast food example. You go and you buy a value meal. You get your sandwich, you get your side, you get your drink. And when you purchase all those things as one unit, ideally, the price that you pay for those things is going to be less as opposed to buying those things individually. You should see some sort of a discount. You should see some sort of a value there. So when you're thinking about what you're putting together, think about what the prices of those things on the rate card is in an a la carte sort of fashion, and make sure that the final price that you put forth in the initial part of the price negotiation is going to be less than that a la carte sort of thing. Now, rule number 21. Negotiate only after you have created value. You want to do this early in the customer's planning cycle, and you want to do this well before your imposed deadline. Keep in mind what the client's business cycle is like. When do they plan their advertising budgets? When are their biggest emphases in their business? When do they do the most of their sales? What's the biggest things that they prep for? Be ahead of them on that. And prior to meeting them in those events, you've also created that value in terms of the packages that you offer and the solutions that you are providing for them. Rule 22, negotiate at the highest level possible, only with the buying decision maker. You don't want to talk to somebody that hears your presentation and thinks you've made some pretty good negotiations and choices and things like that, and then says, okay, I'll take this to my boss. Then you've got to do the whole negotiation process all over again, and you're starting from that point that the underling has presented to their supervisor. That puts you at a real disadvantage. Talk to the actual decision maker when you're doing negotiations. Related to that, don't negotiate with your boss present if you can avoid it. If your boss is present, the buyer's not going to talk to you. It's going to talk to your boss because he or she is more of a decision maker than you are. You wind up losing control of the discussion. You might also lose control of the account because even if you get the sale, the person's going to want to continually deal with your boss and not you. Rule number 24. Negotiate on your own turf if possible. Think about it this way. Sports teams, they love playing at home. They know their field. They know their fans. That's why they call it a home field advantage. Same thing's true in business. You're more comfortable in your own office setting. You know how all the equipment works. If you're using PowerPoint, multimedia in order to make presentations, you know where things are at. It makes things a lot easier for you in terms of a control standpoint when you host people at your office. Rule number 25, negotiate face-to-face whenever possible. If you don't, you can't see their body language. You can't assess their nonverbal behavior, the cues that they may throw off. So in other words, you don't get the full communication aspect. When you see somebody in person, you're able to take those nonverbal cues and assess those as you're going through the negotiation process. Rule 26, if you have to negotiate on the phone, you be the one that makes the phone call. This allows you to be better prepared before the phone call, because even if you tell someone to call you at such and such a time, or they say they're going to call you at such and such a time, it's very possible that they may call you ahead of that time, and that makes less time for you to be able to prepare, and they call you and you're not quite ready, and that puts you in a logistical and a psychological scramble. So you be the one to call if at all possible. At this point, let's take a break. We'll continue on with the rules over on part B of chapter 13.